So Yasmeen, in the last segment, you basically walked us through the dynamic that's happening with Brexit. Explain to us that Brexit was not just a moment; it was basically voting to engage in a process, and that perhaps Great Britain was not, England was not particularly cautious in triggering the exit, I guess, provision of the EU, and now they seem to be running out of time. Theresa May, I feel like we've read a couple of stories, at least on this side of the Atlantic, that suggested that Theresa May was her leadership was in serious jeopardy, in peril at different times, because she can't seem to make a deal with the EU that she can sell to her domestic audience. Like, what is, before we talk about just like the actual predicament she's in, what is it that she's giving to the EU that the constituency she needs domestically is unsatisfied with?
It's a great question. I mean, it kind of runs the gambit with things that, her opponents don't like about the deal she's negotiated with the EU. But the main thing that people tend to point to that they don't like is a thing called the Irish backstop, which basically is something that, in order to prevent a hard border forming on the island of Ireland that separates Northern Ireland, which is in the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, which is in the EU, to prevent there from being a hard border, that the UK would, temporarily speaking, stay closely tied to the EU rules and regulations when it comes to trade, until they figure out some sort of trade deal, and then it won't be needed anymore. I know that all sounded really complex, but the reason that a lot of Brexiteers don't like it is because when they leave the EU, they want to go out there and start forming trade deals with countries like the US and others around the world. And they feel like they can't do that so long as they're tied to EU rules, because it limits their ability to negotiate with other countries and strike these trade deals that they want. So that's a big reason. It's the Irish backstop, which again is meant to be temporary. In fact, both the EU and the UK have said they don't want it to go into effect at all, but they need it as some sort of like insurance policy effectively, to make sure that the Irish border doesn't become a hard one, that the Good Friday Agreement is maintained. So that's a big issue. But I mean, principally, the reason that people don't like her deal across the country really runs the gambit. And again, as we were talking about before, it kind of depends on what people want out of Brexit. For some people, particularly on the opposition Labour Party, they want to maintain a close economic relationship with the EU, even if that does mean sticking to their rules. For others, they don't want to leave the EU at all and think that they should oppose May's deal and try pushing for a second referendum to hopefully get the country to stay. So, her deal's opponents don't all have one reason. For many, it's because they just simply want their own version of Brexit.
So, and are there? So it sounds like there are people who the Remain folk. They obviously would complain about the deal because they don't want any deal, and so complaining about the details of the deal is the most expedient way to perhaps articulate that. Are there, and then there are others who seem to be, somewhat impatient, as you're expressing, that they don't want to get.
They just want to leave. Yeah.
They just want to leave. They don't want to get mired. They don't want to get mired in a sort of like a separation as opposed to a divorce, because those things can go on for a long time. But are there constituencies who presumably have they are ostensibly for Brexit, but are worried about, like, they took that position out of maybe some measure of expedience or as a reflection of the people that vote for them. And I should remind people that the British government is a parliamentary system, so you have a lot of different agendas that aren't necessarily sort of melded into a big umbrella. as much as, people are maybe gathering around like some type of shelter, I guess. And so are there constituencies that sort of aren't really as Brexity as they appear, and so the best thing for them is to keep having an issue with the deal? I'm just trying to get a sense of like it feels like that every single member of the British population has a slightly different take on what should happen.
Yeah, it is a bit complicated. I mean, basically, it really does run the gambit. There are some people within the population who, when they voted to leave, they just wanted to cut ties completely and just go, even if that means with no deal. There are others who, maybe certain aspects of being a member of the EU, like freedom of movement, as we were discussing, they want that to end. And so they want to kind of, keep the economic cooperation, but they want to stop that. And then there are others who, who obviously, as we said, want to stay. I mean, there isn't really a dichotomy in terms of, it's not just as simple as leave and remain. I mean, various other kind of visions for Brexit emerged. I mean, I've talked to business, small to medium-sized business owners who want a customs union because they're worried about their businesses and their future and the uncertainty. But I've also talked to others who, precisely because of their businesses, because of regulations that are made at the EU level, which obviously the UK as a member state had a role in making, because they don't like those regulations, they want to leave. So, you often find that it tends to be for very personal reasons. That I don't think people were necessarily, I think obviously a lot of things that were said during the referendum, seemingly erroneous things like how much money would be saved for the National Health Service and stuff like that, swayed a lot of people's opinions. But you find that people tend to have very specific reasons for why they voted for this, which again, I think makes coming to a consensus on what Brexit should look like quite difficult.
All right. So we have about 90 seconds left here. What happens with Theresa May? I mean, does she at one point just say like, I can't do it. Bye. I'm taking off. I'm early retirement. This is just not a job that I can deal with.
You know what? It's funny when she called for a general election and then ended up losing her majority instead of gaining a bigger one. She ran on basically a promise of being strong and stable leadership. And throughout this process, we've seen that she's been profoundly weak, yet surprisingly stable. She's kind of just buggered on with everything and just kind of kept pushing. And she's been known for that. People have, really have come to admire that about her, even if they hate everything else. That all kind of changed on Wednesday night, where she sort of played her last card and told her colleagues in Parliament. She said, "Look, I will set I will leave. I will end my premiership early if you back my deal, and then we can have a new prime minister to take us through the next phase of the negotiations, which is about the future relationship and the trade deal and so on." So she's ultimately seems to be willing to sacrifice herself for this deal and ultimately for her party. So she may very well end up leaving. And Brexit is pretty much how she's going to be remembered, if that's the case.
Wow. And with just like 20 seconds left, we only have like about a week or two left, right? And then it's just drop dead. EU says bye-bye.
See, that's the thing. We really don't know. We don't know when Brexit's supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen on Friday. That was the date that was promised for 2 years. Then, because they knew it clearly they weren't going to reach it in time, the EU offered them an extension either to April 12th or to May 22nd, depending on when they passed her deal. So to be honest with you, Sim, by this point, we're probably actually going to know if it's April 12th or May, because it'll probably be decided by the end of the week. But I mean, the truth of the matter is we just don't know.
Right.
We will have to wait and see. But that's the frustrating thing with Brexit. You kind of just have to always wait and see.
Well, Yasmeen Serhan, thank you so much for explaining it to us to the extent that it's possible to understand with the human brain. Much appreciated.